Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to C-18 tonight. And the question I have for Canadians that are watching this evening, does the PM want to control what you see and hear about him on the internet? And let's look, and my colleagues have already mentioned what the Prime Minister has already done. Previous examples, Jody Wilson-Raybould's a classic example of trying to control people actually in this House. Overlooking foreign interference to win elections, freezing bank accounts of protesters, mandates, and countless other things that this Prime Minister has shown that his ultimate goal is control, right? That he's not quite comfortable unless he has full control. And, but the predecessor to C-18 is really C-11 the way I see it. And legislatively, he's already implemented a censorship bill. It's been called that by many people, including us. And he rammed it through in this House. And what it does, and I got very familiar with the previous iteration, C-10 and C-11, is where he censors, now by law, through the CRTC, user-generated content. So he actually wants to control, like he might not like what I post on YouTube, he might not like this video. It's still freedom of speech reigns in this country for now. But what the Prime Minister may do is say, look, I don't really like what the member from Prince George Peace River is saying right now, so off he goes and no more on YouTube or on social media. So we already see that he is gaining control by censoring Canadians. But let's look at what Bill C-18 does. Let's start off by, and the way I phrase it is, who doesn't get the money and who gets the money? Well, who doesn't get the money? And this is from an article. It's Sue Gardner, Bill C-18 is bad for journalism and bad for Canada. She says, and this is who doesn't get the money, this process will benefit big legacy media companies at the expense of startups and indie publishers. She goes on to say, meanwhile, many small and indie publishers are actually excluded from C-18. The bill, listen closely folks, the bill excludes operations that employ fewer than 2 journalists and excludes those primarily focused on a particular topic in favor of those that make general interest news. So, and the question you'd have to ask again when I talked about control, well, guess what? Small publishers are much harder to control. Big media is a lot easier to control. You just give them millions and billions of dollars and away you go. Let's talk about again who's getting the money. I'll go on. So the same article, if news organizations became dependent on money from the platforms to sustain their operations, as they surely would in the passage of this bill, C-18, this dependence, not independence, would create an incentive for them to pull their punches in how they covered the platforms. So here we see an example where, you know, media might say, well, I don't want to quite go after them because, after all, they're writing my checks. So, and I think what's even more concerning based on, and again, what I've alluded to, what the control of big tech, but the control of government. So this is, again, from the same article. For journalism to be trusted, it needs to be and perceived to be independent from government and willing and able to be critical of government. Bill C-18 deepens government involvement in the industry. This creates an incentive for the industry to be soft on the government, and it will further reduce trust in journalism. And again, that's not from me, Madam Speaker, that's from this writer. And anything that reduces trust in journalism is dangerous, especially now. I started by talking about who gets the money. Well, let's have a little look at what the money looks like. So this is from an article. It's by Samantha Edwards, What to Know About Bill C-18, the proposed law that could affect Canadian news publishers. A report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer said that the around $329 million the bill would generate for news outlets, around $247 million would go to broadcasters such as CBC, Bell, Shaw, and Rogers. The fact that 3/4 of the money will be going to broadcasters, some of which are the richest companies in Canada, plus the public broadcaster, which are heavily subsidized already, undermines the government's whole premise of the bill. And of course, what is the temptation? What I've already talked about. The temptation, of course, is somebody that's writing you checks for millions and billions of dollars, Madam Speaker. Are you going to be as truthful in reporting as you should be to the public? What's your first goal? Is it to provide news and truthfulness to Canadians? Well, right now, what the government is doing is say, hey, you want this big check? We want you to say this. And we know that this Prime Minister is already about control and wants to control the message, what people say about him. Will he use this as a heavy stick? I believe he will. And I guess what we've already talked about with C-11, the control that that bill gave to the CRTC, really, and CRTC is then influenced by the Prime Minister and Cabinet. Says it clear right in the bill. Well, here is from an article that says from Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Extortion, Dependency and Media Welfare, the Liberals' Bill C-18. Those in favor have no qualms about creating a news media industry permanently dependent on the good graces of the two most imposing powers in the lives of citizens these days, big tech and big government. And certainly, I'm former chair of the Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. I saw how powerful big tech was and is. And government working together with these guys is really a scary thing for those who care about freedom in the country. I'll go on. All involved will huff and puff servingly while the Trudeau government happily renders media companies ever more dependent on federal funding. Again, Madam Speaker, not me saying this, Madam Speaker, but articles that are concerned about these very same measures that this controlling Prime Minister, who's already implemented a censorship bill, will now try and covet those two big entities to have the narrative go his way. One interesting testimony when I was doing some research, because I knew I'd be speaking to this, was the Senate debate. Liberal Senator Paula Simons in her speech. And, you know, here's a Liberal senator, clearly Liberal, former media person, but very concerned about what this bill brings if passed. And I'll read a couple of her quotes. More than that, I'm asking if it's wise. How dependent can the Canadian news media be if they are so deeply beholden to the goodwill and future economic success of foreign corporations? And she's referring to big tech in this instance. She goes on. This is from what she quoted Mr. Greenspan in 2021 at Senate committee. Inviting the platforms to negotiate deals with individual publishers can badly distort the information marketplace. People have expressed concerns for decades that advertisers influence news agendas. Exactly what I've been saying, Madam Speaker. And this is a person that's been in the industry her whole life. They have massive public policy agendas of their own, including tax policy, regulatory oversight, data, etc., etc. You are here to strengthen the independent press, not to create new dependencies. Another quote from the senator. And are we comfortable giving unprecedented new regulatory powers to the CRTC to intervene in the business of print journalism and to require mandatory media codes of ethics, given the free press has never been subject in any way to the authority of the CRTC? And I'll finish with this, Madam Speaker. You heard my question, and who controls the CRTC? We already heard it's Cabinet and this Prime Minister.
That's right.
Right? So my question when I started, does the PM want to control what you see and hear about him on the internet?
Yeah. Apparently.
Absolutely yes. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
And comments, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Talk about being paranoid. You know, it's interesting. The member, when he talks about C-11 and how the government wants to censor everything, then goes on to C-18, and then we're going to pay off the media, so the media will give us nothing but positive story. But the real maneuver, no doubt, is the fact we were able to fool the Bloc Party, the NDP, and the Green in order to be able to support the Liberals in bringing all this together so we could pass this kind of legislation so the Prime Minister of Canada would be almighty and powerful. That's the type of tinfoil hat I think we're seeing across the way, Madam Speaker. My question is, does he really believe what he's talking about? Is this the type of things that he's promoting through his social media?
The Honourable Member Prince George, Peace River, Northern Rockies.
What the member just asked me would be funny if it wasn't so scary. This is from a Liberal senator appointed by this Prime Minister. She said, are we comfortable giving unprecedented new regulatory powers to the CRTC to intervene in the business of print journalism and to require mandatory media codes of ethics, given the free press has never been before subject in any way to the authority of the CRTC? That's from a Liberal senator. Thank you.